I am Evelyn Hart. For 30 years, I have poured my life into this vineyard. Every row of vines you see stretching across these rolling hills was planted by my hands. Every trellis I hammered into the earth, every graft I made in the cool dawn light, every barrel I rolled into the aging cellar with my own strength, it all belongs to me, not because someone handed it over, but because I built it from nothing. I was 32 when I bought the first parcel of land, bare, rocky soil that everyone else said was worthless for anything but grazing goats. I didn't listen. I sold the small apartment I'd scraped together for in the city, quit the corporate job that was slowly killing my soul, and moved here with nothing but a beat-up truck, a few cuttings I'd begged from older winemakers, and a stubborn refusal to fail. The first years were brutal. Summers so hot the leaves scorched on the vine, winters that froze the irrigation lines, storms that tore trellises apart, nights I slept in the barn because I couldn't afford to fix the roof on the house yet. I learned how to prune in the dark, how to read the soil like a book, how to taste the difference between a grape that would become great wine and one that would never make it past vinegar. I lost entire harvests to mildew, to birds, to bad luck. But I never stopped. People used to call me the crazy widow who talks to vines. They don't call me that anymore. Now they call me Evelyn Hart of Hart Vineyards, the name on the bottles in restaurants in San Francisco, New York, London, the name on awards that sit quietly on the shelf in my office because I don't need trophies to remind me what I've done. This land is not an inheritance. It is not a gift. It is not luck. It is sweat that soaked through my shirts until they could stand up by themselves. It is years that slipped away while I was out in the rows instead of at parties or weddings or anywhere else people my age were supposed to be. It is blood, from cuts on my hands, from thorns that tore my arms, from the time I fell off the ladder in the barrel room and cracked 2 ribs but still crawled back to work the next morning. I built this place alone. I raised my daughter Claire here, teaching her the same lessons the vines taught me: patience, resilience, the ruthless honesty of nature. She grew up running between the rows, barefoot and laughing, and now she's the one who blends the final cuvées with me each harvest. I am not a rich old lady who owns a winery. I am the woman who made the dirt produce something extraordinary. I am the founder. This is my empire, grown one vine at a time, and I will protect it with everything I have, because no one gave it to me. I earned every inch. I never thought I'd be the kind of woman who falls for charm again. By the time I met William Cross, Hart Vineyards had become more than a business. It was my fortress, my proof that I could stand alone and thrive. Claire was away at university most of the year. The house was quiet except for the hum of the fermentation tanks and the occasional wind through the vines. I told myself the silence was peaceful. I told myself I liked it. I was wrong. It started at a charity tasting in Napa. Nothing grand, just the usual crowd of winemakers, collectors, and people who like to be seen drinking good wine. I was there to represent Hart, not to socialize. I wore the same black dress I always wore to these things, kept my answers short, and planned to leave early. Then he approached me. William Cross. Tall, silver at the temples, voice low and measured like someone who never needed to raise it. He introduced himself politely, said he'd been admiring my 2018 Cabernet Reserve for years. He didn't gush. He didn't try to impress me with his own cellar or his connections. He asked thoughtful questions about the soil on the east slope, about why I'd chosen to age that vintage in French oak instead of American, about the year the drought almost killed half the block. He listened. Really listened. I found myself answering more than I usually did. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was performing Evelyn Hart, the winery owner. I felt seen. He mentioned, almost in passing, that he'd lost his wife 5 years earlier to cancer. No drama, no bid for sympathy, just a quiet fact, delivered with the same calm he used to discuss wine. I nodded. I understood loss. I'd lost my own parents young, lost relationships that never quite fit, lost count of the nights I'd sat alone on the porch with a glass and the stars, wondering if this was all there was. We exchanged numbers. Not because he asked for mine, he waited until I offered. A small thing, but it mattered. The messages started innocently. A photo of a bottle he'd opened that reminded him of mine. A recommendation for a book on biodynamic farming. An invitation to dinner at a small place in Sonoma he said had the best duck confit he'd ever tasted. Nothing pushy, nothing rushed. I said yes. Our first dinner lasted 4 hours. We talked about everything and nothing. Travel, books, the way the light changes over the vines at harvest, the loneliness that creeps in when success arrives, but the people you want to share it with are gone. He didn't flirt the way younger men do, all bravado and hunger. He was gentle, attentive, funny in a dry, understated way. When he walked me to my car, he didn't try to kiss me. He just said, "I'd like to see you again, Evelyn, if you'd like that too." I did. Over the next few months, he became a steady presence. Weekends, he'd drive up to the vineyard, walk the rows with me, ask questions, make coffee in the morning while I checked the barrels. He never once commented on the house needing updates or suggested I hire more help. He seemed content simply to be there, to share the quiet. I let myself relax into it. I let myself believe that after 30 years of building alone, I could finally let someone in without losing what I'd made. I let myself believe he saw me, not the winery, not the land, not the bank account, but me. Looking back, that was the moment the door opened. Not to love, to danger. He was perfect, too perfect. Clean suit, clean manners, clean past, at least the version he showed me. No red flags waving, no obvious greed, no clumsy grabs for control. That was the trap. Because the best predators don't roar. They whisper. They wait. They make you feel safe. And then they move. I didn't see it coming. Not yet. They came for the weekend. William had mentioned it casually a few days earlier. "My children would love to see the place, Evelyn. They've heard so much about it." I smiled and said, of course. I wanted to meet them. If this man was going to be part of my life, his family should be part of mine. Or so I thought. They arrived in separate cars on a Saturday morning in late spring, when the vines were just beginning to leaf out and the air smelled of green and promise. William greeted each one with the same calm affection he always showed me. Hugs that were brief but warm, names spoken softly like reminders. Andrew first, then Victoria, then Lucas trailing behind with his phone already in hand. They were polite, polished, well-dressed in that expensive, understated way that says money without shouting it. Andrew in a crisp navy blazer. Victoria in cream linen that somehow stayed pristine despite the dust on the gravel drive. Lucas in dark jeans and a hoodie from some tech conference I'd never heard of. We walked the property together. I showed them the original block I'd planted 30 years ago, the new experimental rows of Petit Verdot, the barrel room where the air is thick with oak and thyme. I talked about the soil, how the clay holds water just long enough in summer, how the morning fog rolls in from the coast like a blanket. I thought they might ask questions. They did, but not the ones I expected. Andrew wanted to know the annual revenue. Not in a rude way. He phrased it professionally, like a boardroom inquiry. "Impressive margins for a boutique operation," he said, nodding as if he were evaluating a stock. "What's the EBITDA look like these days? Any plans to scale distribution?" Victoria barely listened to the answers. Her eyes kept drifting to the horizon, to the acreage that rolled down toward the creek, to the untouched parcels I'd left fallow on purpose. "This view," she murmured more than once. "You could subdivide that lower section, you know, estate lots, gated community. The zoning would be straightforward with the right permits." She said it like she was offering helpful advice, not calculating square footage in her head. Lucas was quieter but no less focused. He asked about the irrigation system first, smart controls, sensors, data logs, then the inventory software, then whether I'd ever considered blockchain for provenance tracking on the bottles. "You've got a gold mine of data here," he said, almost to himself. "Untapped. Imagine the valuation if you digitized the entire chain of custody." Not one of them asked how long I'd been alone before their father came along. Not one asked if I was happy. Not one asked what the vineyard meant to me beyond numbers. They asked about expansion, about selling direct to consumer, about partnerships with bigger distributors, about how much land was underutilized, about succession planning, casually dropped as if it were just practical conversation. William watched it all with that same gentle smile, occasionally touching my arm or murmuring, "They're just excited to meet you, darling." He never corrected them, never steered the talk back to something warmer. I answered their questions. I smiled. I poured them each a glass of the current release and let them taste what I'd built. Oh, they complimented the wine, sincerely, I think, but even the praise felt transactional. "This would sell well in Asia," Andrew said. "Strong structure, good aging potential." By the time they left on Sunday afternoon, the weekend had felt less like a family visit and more like an audit. I stood on the porch and watched their taillights disappear down the long drive. William stayed behind, of course. He came up behind me, slipped his arms around my waist, kissed the side of my neck. "They like you," he said softly. "They really do." I didn't answer right away, because I had felt it. The shift in the air. The way their eyes moved over the land, not with wonder but with measurement. The way they spoke of my life's work in terms of potential profit, leverage, access. They didn't see a home, they saw an asset. And William, he let them. That was the first real crack in the perfect picture he'd painted. Not loud, not violent, just a thin, sharp line where warmth should have been. I told myself it was nothing, just city people, just different priorities, just children protecting their father's future. I told myself a lot of things that weekend, but deep down, something had already begun to tighten in my chest. A quiet warning. The kind you feel before you hear the footsteps behind you in the dark. I never told William the truth about the vineyard. Not once. Not when we sat on the porch watching the sun drop behind the hills, glasses of my best Pinot in hand. Not when he asked gently about my estate planning over breakfast one morning. Not even when he slipped the prenuptial agreement across the kitchen table 6 months before the wedding, and saying it was just to protect us both, standard for people in our position. I signed it, and I smiled while I did, because the document he gave me was careful, thoughtful, fair on paper. It said the vineyard, Hart Vineyards, was my separate property, acquired before marriage, and would remain mine no matter what happened between us. It protected what I'd built. It seemed reasonable. So I signed without hesitation. What he didn't know, what I never corrected him on, was that the vineyard wasn't just separate property in the legal sense. It was mine in every sense. I had structured everything years ago, long before William ever appeared. Irrevocable trusts, LLCs layered like armor, ownership documents that placed the land, the vines, the brand, the cellar, even the water rights. Entirely outside my personal name in ways that made it nearly untouchable. Not because I was paranoid, because I had learned the hard way what happens when you trust too easily. My first serious relationship after Claire's father left had been with a man who seemed kind, steady, ambitious. He convinced me to put his name on a small piece of land I'd bought as an investment. When he walked out 2 years later, he took half the value with him in the divorce. I fought in court for months. I won back most of it, but the legal fees and the stress carved something permanent out of me. I swore I would never again let anyone close enough to reach my life's work. So when I met William, I kept the full truth locked away. I let him believe the vineyard was mine alone because we were in love, because I was generous, because I trusted him. I let him see the surface, the successful woman who owned her empire outright, who could afford to be open-hearted. I never told him about the layers beneath, the trusts that named Claire as successor beneficiary, The clauses that dissolved any spousal claim the moment fraud or undue influence was proven. The quiet instructions to my lawyer, Laura Kim, to monitor every document that crossed my desk once William entered the picture. It wasn't a lie born of cruelty. It was instinct. The same instinct that makes a deer freeze when it smells a predator, or makes a mother hide her child when danger walks too close. I loved him, or at least I believed I did, in those early months when everything still felt warm and possible. But love doesn't erase survival, and I had survived too much to gamble my future on anyone's word, no matter how soft the voice that spoke it. So I kept the secret. I answered his casual questions about our future with vague smiles and kisses. I let him talk about merging households, about how beautiful the vineyard would look with a few updates. I never corrected him when he referred to it as ours, because the moment I said the full truth, "This land is mine, William, in ways you can never touch," the mask might slip, the questions might start, the hurt feelings, the arguments, the probing. And I wasn't ready to see what lay behind those gentle eyes if the answer was greed. Looking back, that silence was the single smartest thing I ever did. Not a betrayal, a shield. The lie that saved everything. Because when the papers started appearing on the table, transfers, powers of attorney, a life insurance changes with my name neatly typed in the beneficiary line, I already knew exactly how to fight back. I had never given him the keys. He just thought I had. And that mistake would cost him everything. It started with small things. A casual mention over coffee one morning. "You know, Evelyn, we should probably get our affairs in order, just in case." He said it lightly, like he was suggesting we pick a restaurant for dinner. I nodded, because people in their 60s do talk about wills and powers of attorney. It's practical, responsible. A week later, the first document appeared. We were sitting at the long oak table in the dining room, the one I'd bought secondhand 20 years ago when the house was still half empty. William slid a single sheet across the polished wood. It was a durable power of attorney for finances. "Oh, just so you don't have to handle everything alone if something happens to me," he said, his voice soft, almost apologetic. "And I'd do the same for you, of course. Mutual, equal." I read it carefully. It looked standard. I signed. He smiled that gentle smile and kissed my forehead. "Thank you for trusting me." The next one came 2 weeks later. Another power of attorney, this time for healthcare. Again, mutual. Again, reasonable. Again, I signed. Then the insurance policies. He brought home printouts from his advisor. "I was thinking we should update the beneficiaries," he explained. "You're my wife now. It only makes sense that everything goes to you if something happens to me, and vice versa." He pointed to the line where my name would replace his late wife's. "See, clean, simple. Ooh, protects us both." I asked why we needed to change mine so soon. My daughter Claire was already the primary beneficiary on everything Hart-related. The personal policies were modest, nothing that would change the vineyard. He looked hurt. Just for a second, eyes widening, mouth tightening before he caught himself. "I thought we were building a life together, Evelyn. I didn't realize you still saw us as separate." The guilt hit exactly where he intended. I signed the change forms. He watched me do it, then folded them neatly and put them in his briefcase. After that, the papers arrived more frequently. Never all at once, always one or two at a time, always presented with care, always wrapped in concern for our future. A quitclaim deed draft, just in case we ever want to add my name to the title for estate purposes. A living trust proposal that would streamline things and avoid probate hassles for the kids. An amendment to the operating agreement of Hart Vineyards, LLC, suggesting a co-manager role for him, purely administrative, he assured me, so I can help when you're tired. Each time the language was flawless, professional, loving even. Each time he waited until we were alone, usually in the evening when the house was quiet and the fire was low in the hearth. He'd pour me a glass of the reserve I loved most, sit close enough that I could smell his cologne, and speak in that calm, reasonable tone that made every objection sound unreasonable. If I hesitated, he didn't push. He simply sighed. "I understand," he'd say. "You've built this alone for so long. It's hard to share control. I just wish you trusted me the way I trust you." The silence that followed was worse than any argument. It filled the room like smoke. I'd feel the weight of it pressing on my chest, the unspoken accusation, "You don't love me enough. You don't believe in us." I started signing faster, not because I agreed, because I wanted the conversation to end, because I wanted the hurt look to disappear from his face, because I told myself it was temporary, harmless, reversible, but something had shifted. The man who once walked the vines with me asking about bud break now talked mostly about valuations, tax advantages, succession. The hands that used to hold mine now handed me pens. The kisses that once felt like warmth now felt like punctuation marks at the end of a transaction. Our marriage hadn't ended. It had been quietly repurposed. No shouting, no threats, just papers on the table, one after another, each one carving a little more space between what I had built and what he wanted to claim. I still smiled when he called me darling. I still let him pour the wine. But inside, the warning I'd felt weeks earlier had grown teeth. He wasn't asking for partnership anymore. He was conducting a campaign, and I was the target. The call came on a Tuesday morning while I was in the barrel room, checking the malolactic fermentation on the new Cabernet. Laura Kim's name flashed on my phone. I almost let it go to voicemail. I was wrist-deep in tasting notes and didn't want to break focus, but something made me answer. "Evelyn," she said, her voice clipped, professional, the way it gets when she's delivering bad news wrapped in steel. "We have a problem, a serious one. I need you in my office, now." I drove straight to San Francisco. No stops, no music, just the hum of the highway and the slow burn of dread settling in my stomach. Laura didn't waste time on pleasantries. She closed the door behind me, gestured to the chair across from her desk, and slid a stack of documents toward me. Official filings, county recorder stamps, notarized signatures. I recognized my name at the bottom of the first page. The signature looked exactly like mine, except it wasn't. It was a quitclaim deed transferring a 20-acre parcel, the heart of the original planting block, the one I'd fought drought and phylloxera to save, into a trust naming William Cross as trustee with full control during my lifetime. Next page, an amendment to the Hart Vineyards LLC operating agreement, adding him as co-managing member with unilateral authority over major decisions. My signature again. Perfect forgery. Then the kicker. A power of attorney. Durable, broad, irrevocable, executed 6 weeks earlier, giving him the right to act on my behalf in all financial and property matters. Filed, recorded, done. I stared at the papers until the letters blurred. "How?" I asked. My voice sounded far away. Laura leaned forward. "He didn't even try to be subtle. The notary is real, some mobile notary service out of Oakland. But the witness signatures are from people who don't exist. I ran them. Fake names, fake addresses. And the dates. You were in France for that trade show the week this supposedly happened. I pulled your passport stamps and flight records yesterday just to be sure." She had known before I walked in. She'd been checking quietly, the way I'd asked her to months ago when the papers started piling up. "He submitted these himself," she continued, "through an online filing portal. Paid the fees with a card in his name. No attorney involved on his side. At least none stupid enough to sign off on this. It's blatant. Criminal blatant." I felt the shift inside me like a gear locking into place. Up until that moment, part of me had still hoped I was wrong, that the coldness, the papers, the children's calculating eyes, they were just misunderstandings, miscommunications, marriage growing pains. But forgery doesn't leave room for misunderstanding. It leaves room for felony charges. I looked up at Laura. What happens now? She didn't smile, but there was something fierce in her eyes. We have options. We can file to rescind immediately. Fraud in the inducement, lack of capacity, forgery. We can notify the county recorder, flag the documents as disputed. We can go straight to the DA's office with evidence of fraud and attempted theft by false pretenses, or... She paused, letting the word hang. We can wait. Let him think it's working. Let him dig deeper, and then we bury him. I didn't answer right away. I thought about the nights he'd sat beside me, hand on mine, murmuring how much he loved the vineyard, how he wanted to protect it for us. I thought about the way he'd watched me sign the innocuous documents, the way his thumb had brushed my wrist like affection. I thought about the vines outside my window right now, still reaching for the sun, still mine. Something hot and bright ignited behind my ribs. Not anger, exactly. Anger is loud and wasteful. This was clarity, cold, precise, the same clarity I felt 30 years ago when I looked at barren land and decided it would grow something extraordinary. He thought I was the mark, I said quietly. Laura nodded once. He thought wrong. I stood up. The papers stayed on the desk like evidence in a crime scene. Start the paperwork to rescind everything, I told her. Flag it all, but don't file with the DA yet, not yet. She raised an eyebrow. You want to play? I want him to keep moving, I said. I want every signature he tries, every lie he tells, every step he takes toward taking what's mine, documented, recorded, witnessed. I met her eyes. And then, when he's so deep he can't climb out, we pull the ladder. Laura smiled then, small, sharp, approving. For the first time in months, I felt the ground steady under my feet again. I wasn't the prey anymore. I was the hunter. And the hunt had just begun. I didn't go looking for the truth about William's past. Not at first. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the forged signatures were an isolated betrayal, something born of desperation or greed, not a lifetime pattern. I told myself that once I exposed the forgeries, he would back down, apologize, disappear quietly. I wanted to believe that the man who had held my hand on the porch and whispered about our future was still somewhere inside him. Laura Kim didn't believe in wishful thinking. She hired Jack Turner, the private investigator I'd kept on retainer since the first power of attorney appeared. Jack was former SFPD, quiet, methodical, the kind of man who spoke in facts instead of opinions. I gave him one instruction: find out who William Cross really is. Everything. No limits. 3 weeks later, Jack came to my house on a rainy Thursday evening. No briefcase, no folder, just a thin envelope and a USB drive. He refused the offer of wine, sat at the kitchen table, and spoke in the same low, even tone he might have used to read a police report. William Cross isn't his original name, he began. He was born William Harlan Crossland in 1958, Marin County. Changed it legally in 1995 after his first wife died. He laid out the photos first. Black and white from old newspapers, color from family albums that had somehow survived online archives and distant relatives' social media. Rose Harlan Crossland, first wife, 38 when she died in 1994, owned a small but profitable chain of boutique hotels along the Northern California coast. 3 properties, oceanfront, inherited from her father, valued at $8 million at the time. Rose died in a single-car accident on Highway 1 during a storm. Official cause, hydroplaning, loss of control, no witnesses, no autopsy requested because the family didn't want to prolong the grief. William inherited everything, sold the hotels within 18 months for a tidy profit. Then Anna Whitaker Cross, second wife, married William in 2001. She was 51, a successful commercial real estate developer in Silicon Valley, office parks, Iowa tech campuses, land she'd bought cheap in the 90s and flipped for millions when the dot-com boom hit. They met at a charity gala. He was charming, widowed, attentive. They married quietly in Napa. She updated her will 6 months later, naming him primary beneficiary on her estate and life insurance. 2 years after that, in 2004, Anna fell from the balcony of their third-floor condo in Palo Alto. Official ruling, accidental. She'd been drinking, the railing was low, she'd had dizzy spells from medication. Toxicology showed alcohol and anti-anxiety meds. No note, no foul play suspected. William collected just under $12 million in assets and insurance. Both women were successful. Both were wealthy in their own right. Both died suddenly, violently, in ways that looked like accidents. Both left everything to him. Jack slid the USB across the table. Bank records, insurance payouts, coroner summaries, old police reports. I've got digital copies of the death certificates, probate filings, even some emails from Rose's sister that never went anywhere because she couldn't prove anything. The pattern is textbook. He targets women who own property, who have no close family watching, who are past the age where people question sudden deaths. He marries fast, isolates, maneuvers control, then accident. Always an accident. I stared at the photos until my eyes burned. Rose smiling at a ribbon-cutting ceremony, her arm around a much younger William. Anna on a yacht, wind in her hair, William behind her with that same gentle smile I knew so well. I thought of the way he'd looked at my vineyard, not with awe but with appraisal. I thought of the forged signatures. I thought of how carefully he'd built the trap. No rush, no violence, just patience and paperwork and the slow erosion of trust. This wasn't a man who got greedy once. This was a man who hunted, systematically, professionally, for decades. My hands were steady when I finally spoke. He's done this twice. He was planning to do it a third time. With me. Jack nodded once. And he's good. No arrests, no charges, no red flags on background checks because the deaths were ruled accidental. But the pattern doesn't lie. I looked out the window at the rain hitting the vines. The leaves were turning gold and red, harvest almost over. Everything I'd built was still standing, still mine. But now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. Not a husband who'd betrayed me. A predator who'd chosen me as prey. The fear that had been gnawing at me for months hardened into something else entirely. Cold fury, clear purpose. He had killed 2 women before me. He would not kill a third. I turned back to Jack. Keep digging. I want everything. Witnesses, financial trails, any loose ends he left. And then I want to know how we make sure he never walks away from this one. Jack stood. Already started. When he left, I sat alone in the dark kitchen, the envelope still open on the table. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I poured myself a glass of the 2018 Reserve, the one critics called elegant, ruthless, unforgettable. I drank it slowly, and I started planning. Because this wasn't just about protecting my land anymore. This was about ending a cycle that had already claimed 2 lives. And I would be the one to stop it. Permanently. I planned the anniversary dinner for exactly 1 year to the day we married. Not out of sentiment. Out of precision. The long table in the main dining room of the Vineyard house was set for 12. White linens, candlelight, the best crystal I owned. Vines twisted across the ceiling beams, real ones I'd cut that morning, still green and fragrant. The menu was simple but deliberate, the wines from every vintage we'd shared together, starting with the 2018 Reserve he'd once called our wine, ending with the new release Claire and I had blended just last harvest. I invited them all. William's 3 children, Andrew, Victoria, Lucas, arrived first, dressed in their usual polished armor, expecting another casual family evening. Then Laura Kim, my lawyer, in a sharp black suit that said she wasn't here to celebrate. Jack Turner, the investigator, quiet in the corner seat like he belonged there. Detective Elena Ruiz from the county sheriff's office, off-duty but official, her badge tucked away but her presence anything but. And Claire, my daughter, seated to my right, calm, composed, the only one who knew the full script. William walked in last. He kissed my cheek, murmured, "Happy anniversary, darling," and took his place at the head of the table opposite me. He looked pleased, relaxed, the way a man looks when he believes he's already won. We ate, we drank. Conversation stayed light. Weather, harvest yields, the new restaurant openings in Napa. No one rushed. No one raised their voice. When the dessert plates were cleared and the coffee poured, I stood. "Oh, I'd like to make a toast," I said. Everyone lifted their glasses. William smiled wider, expecting something sentimental. "To truth," I said simply, "and to the people who help uncover it." I nodded to Laura. She placed a slim folder in the center of the table. No drama, just paper. "This is a copy of the quitclaim deed filed last month," she began, voice even, professional. "It bears Evelyn Hart's signature, transferring 20 acres of Hart Vineyards into a trust controlled by William Cross. The signature is a forgery. We have forensic analysis confirming it. We also have flight records showing Evelyn was in Bordeaux the week the document was supposedly signed and notarized." Andrew's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Victoria's eyes flicked to her father. Lucas stared at the folder like it might bite. Laura continued without pause. "Next, an amended LLC operating agreement adding William as co-manager with unilateral authority. Same forged signature, same fake notary, filed online using William's credit card." She slid another set of pages forward. "And this, 2 powers of attorney, financial and healthcare, both forged, both filed, plus changes to life insurance beneficiaries also forged." William's face remained calm, but I saw the muscle in his jaw twitch. Once, twice. Detective Ruiz spoke next. "Mr. Cross, I'm Detective Elena Ruiz, Sonoma County Sheriff's Office. We've opened an investigation into multiple counts of forgery, fraud, attempted theft by false pretenses, and, based on new information, possible connection to prior suspicious deaths." She laid down photographs. Not dramatic crime scene shots, just old newspaper clippings and probate documents. "Rose Harlan Crossland, 1994, single-car accident, inherited hotels worth $8 million, sold within 18 months. Another photo. "Anna Whitaker Cross, 2004, fall from balcony, inherited $12 million in real estate and insurance." Ruiz's voice stayed level. "Both ruled accidental. Both left everything to you. We're re-examining those cases in light of the current pattern of behavior." The room was silent, except for the faint crackle of the fire in the hearth. William looked around the table, at his children, who now wouldn't meet his eyes, at Claire, who stared back without blinking, at me. He tried the gentle smile. "Evelyn, this is a misunderstanding. I would never—" I cut him off. Not loudly, just firmly. "You would. You did. Twice before. And you tried a third time." I reached under the table and placed a small digital recorder between us, the one I'd left running in my office for months, capturing every late-night conversation, every darling laced with suggestion, every casual mention of our vineyard. Claire pressed play. His voice filled the room, soft and reasonable. "It would simplify things if we added my name to the title, just for estate purposes." "You trust me, don't you, Evelyn? After everything we've built together." I let it run for 30 seconds, then stopped it. "No more gaslighting," I said. "No more papers on the table. No more accidents waiting to happen." I turned to Detective Ruiz. "Everything is documented. Timestamps, witnesses, forensic reports, financial trails. We're ready to file charges tonight." William's children shifted uncomfortably. Andrew cleared his throat. "Dad, is this true?" William didn't answer. He looked at me, really looked, for the first time without the mask. I met his gaze, calm, unblinking. "You came for my land," I said quietly. "You came for my life. You miscalculated." I lifted my glass one last time. "To the vines that endure," I said. and to the women who protect what they've built. I drank. Everyone else followed, slowly, silently. Then Detective Ruiz stood. "William Cross, you're under arrest for forgery, fraud, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Additional charges pending review of the prior cases." She read him his rights while 2 deputies waited at the doorway. No shouting, no tears, no violence, just the truth, laid out on the table like the evidence it was. As they cuffed him, quietly, efficiently, William looked back at me one final time. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply held his eyes until the door closed behind him. The room exhaled. Claire reached over and squeezed my hand. Laura nodded once, approving. Jack Turner stood to leave. Detective Ruiz promised to keep me updated. I stayed seated a moment longer, looking at the empty chair where he'd sat. The candles were still burning. The wine still tasted of the earth I'd fought for. And for the first time in a long time, the house felt completely, perfectly mine. The dinner was over. The nightmare was over. And I was still standing. The cuffs clicked shut with a sound so ordinary it almost disappointed me. I had imagined this moment 100 times in the weeks leading up to the dinner, rehearsed every possible reaction, every word he might say, every plea or denial. But when it happened, it was quiet, efficient, almost bureaucratic. Detective Ruiz read the rights again, slower this time for the record. William stood perfectly still while the deputies secured his wrists behind his back. No struggle, no outburst. Just that same measured calm he'd worn like a second skin for as long as I'd known him. His children watched from their seats like statues. Andrew's face had gone gray. He kept swallowing as if trying to force words back down his throat. Victoria stared at the floor, arms crossed tight across her chest, lips pressed into a thin line. Lucas looked smallest of all, 28 going on 12, his phone forgotten in his lap, eyes wide and glassy. None of them moved to help him. None of them spoke. William glanced at them once, briefly, as if waiting for something, support, outrage, even a token protest. Nothing came. The silence stretched until it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Ruiz nodded to the deputies. "Let's go." They guided him toward the door. He paused just before the threshold, turned slightly so he could see me across the length of the table. "Evelyn," he said, voice low, almost gentle, "you didn't have to do this." I met his eyes without flinching. "Yes," I said. "I did. Not for revenge, not to watch him suffer. I did it because Rose and Anna never got the chance to stop him. Because the next woman might not have a lawyer like Laura, an investigator like Jack, a daughter like Claire, or the simple, stubborn will to keep asking questions until the answers bled truth. I did it to end the pattern. The deputies led him out into the night. Red and blue lights flickered across the gravel drive, painting the vines in short, pulsing bursts of color. The front door closed behind them with a soft finality. Inside, the room exhaled. Claire stood first. She came around the table and wrapped her arms around me from behind, resting her chin on my shoulder. No words, just the steady warmth of her, the way she used to when she was small and the world felt too big. Laura gathered the folders, stacking them neatly. "We'll file the formal complaint tomorrow morning," she said. "The DA's office already has copies of everything. They're moving fast. Forgery alone is enough for now. The rest, the cold cases, that'll take time, but the pattern is undeniable." Jack Turner rose quietly. "I'll keep feeding them what they need. There's more out there, loose threads he never tied off." I nodded. "Thank you. All of you." They left one by one. Handshakes, quiet goodbyes, promises to call in the morning. Detective Ruiz was the last to go. She paused at the door. "You okay?" she asked. I looked around the room. The half-empty wine glasses, the candles burned low, the empty chair at the head of the table. "I'm better than okay," I said. She gave a small, understanding nod and stepped out into the dark. Claire and I stayed. We cleared the table together, slowly, methodically. Dishes in the sink, glasses rinsed, leftover food wrapped and stored, ordinary tasks that felt like reclaiming the space. When the kitchen was clean again, we walked out onto the porch. The night was cool, the air thick with the scent of fermenting grapes and wet earth after a light rain. The vineyard stretched out before us, rows upon rows, humming silent and steady under the stars. Claire slipped her hand into mine. "He's gone," she said softly. "He is. And we're still here." I squeezed her fingers. "We are." Justice didn't arrive with fireworks or thunder. It came quietly, precisely, the way a vine finds its way through rocky soil year after year until it bears fruit. It came late for Rose and Anna, but it came. And because it came for me, the cycle stops here. No more widows, no more accidents, no more predators wearing the mask of love, just the land, just us, just the quiet certainty that what I built would never again be someone else's to take. I looked up at the sky, clear and endless. Then I turned back inside, closed the door, and, for the first time in a long time, locked it behind me. Not out of fear, out of peace. The house is quiet again. Not the hollow quiet of loneliness, but the full, satisfied quiet of a place that knows exactly who it belongs to. Weeks have passed since the night of the dinner. The legal machine moves slowly but relentlessly. Indictments filed, bail denied, preliminary hearings scheduled. William's children have scattered. Andrew back to his finance world in New York. Victoria quietly listing properties that aren't hers to sell. Lucas disappearing into code and silence. They don't call. They don't visit. I don't expect them to. The bridge between us burned the moment the cuffs clicked shut, and I have no interest in rebuilding it. Claire came home the day after the arrest. She didn't ask for explanations or apologies. She simply walked through the front door with her suitcase, hugged me for a long time, and said, "I'm staying. For good this time." We didn't talk about William that first week. We talked about the vines instead. About which blocks needed thinning, which barrels were ready for bottling, which experimental clones we'd try next harvest. We walked the rows at dawn, coffee in hand, watching the mist lift off the hills like it always has. We pruned together until our hands were sticky with sap and our backs ached in the best way. We laughed at the stupid jokes we used to make when she was a teenager running barefoot between the trellises. She's not here because she has to be. She's here because she wants to be, because this land is hers too, not as an inheritance she's waiting to claim, but as a legacy she's choosing to carry forward. I wake up early now, the way I always have. I make coffee in the same old pot, step onto the porch, and look out at the vineyard stretching in every direction. The vines are dormant for winter, bare and gnarled, but I know what's sleeping beneath the surface. Come spring, they'll bud again. Come fall, they'll bear fruit again, year after year, unchanged, unconquered. I don't need a man to walk these rows with me. I don't need a husband to fill the chair at the head of the table. I don't need anyone to tell me the vineyard is beautiful or valuable or worth protecting. I already know. 30 years of sweat and storms and stubborn refusal to quit taught me that. The forged signatures, the dead wives, the quiet campaign to take it all away, they only proved what I'd known since the beginning. This place is mine because I made it mine. Not because someone gave it to me, not because I married into it, because I earned every inch, every root, every bottle that carries my name. Some nights I sit on the porch with a glass of the 2018 Reserve, the one critics still talk about, and I think about Rose and Anna. I wish I could have met them. I wish I could have warned them. But all I can do now is make sure no one else has to learn the same lesson the hard way. William's trial will come. There will be headlines, perhaps. There will be questions about the past cases, about how long he got away with it. I'll answer what I need to answer. I'll testify if they ask, but I won't let it define me. What defines me is right here. The soil under my boots, the scent of oak from the barrel room drifting on the breeze, the sound of Claire humming in the kitchen as she experiments with a new blend. I am not a victim who survived. I am not a widow who avenged. I am Evelyn Hart, a founder, mother, the guardian of this land, and every vine, every single one, is mine. I raise my glass to the dark hills, to the stars above them, to the quiet certainty that tomorrow I'll wake up and do it all again. No regrets, no apologies, just the next harvest waiting, and me, still standing, still growing, still free.